Um, Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 3 of our Industry Insight series here at Tuya Hospitality and Residential. Across the course of this series, we're going to be bringing in a series of fantastic experts across their respective industries to discuss some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of IoT implementation, such as to improve discourse and understanding from both sides of the table. So today, we're going to be diving further into hospitality and specifically vacation rentals. Our guide will be the fantastic Will Slickers, who will bring a depth of experience from vacation rentals, hotels, and a highly successful podcast series. Will started working for a Marriott Autograph Collection in Spokane, Washington, and shortly realized his passion for people and hospitality was his dream, life, and career. Will played many roles in the hotel of over 700 rooms, and after a few years, he wanted to learn and grow more by learning the operations side of the business. So like any single 23-year-old, he moved to the Oregon coast to manage a small collection of independent properties and restaurants while starting a podcast. With a change in ownership, he then moved to a smaller 70-unit all-suite hotel property. During this time, the podcast really started to take shape and lead Will to take the risk to quit his day job and venture out to run the podcast full-time right before the start of 2020. During this last year of full-time entrepreneurship, Will Slickers has created more podcast episodes, industry connections, and industry concepts than he would have ever imagined. Now, with a high demand for content, tools, and resources for anything involving hospitality, with a hospitality and revenue management certification through Cornell University, Will has dedicated his time to individual and big name operators in the vacation rental and boutique hotel segments of hospitality, while still growing the show and industry network globally. So, Will, welcome.
Dylan, thank you so much. And I don't think I've ever had anyone call me Fantastic Will Slickers. So I think that's going to be my new superhero name if I ever get to that point.
I also want to apologize to anyone because I know before the call, I wanted to check the pronunciation of Spokane. And I completely screwed it up as I ran through my notes as well. So apologize to anyone from there and yourself.
No, it's a common theme, so don't worry about it. It's water on a duck's back.
So yeah, I mean, at the moment, I know you're in Cancun. So how's it going over there, first of all, just to drop in?
Amazing. Had coffee out in the sunshine and put my feet in the pool for a little bit and yeah, can't complain. It's a good life, but lots of work to be done. So balancing work and play is very, very true.
Perks of hospitality, I guess. We'll say that is
100%.
A lot of market research that I found can be done in very nice places.
Yes, that's what we'll call it, market research.
I mean, yeah, we've connected before and we've spoken, probably wasted a lot of good content through not recording some of our previous calls, I must say. But we'll try and save as much.
I was gonna say that's been the theme. I've been like having conversations with people. I'm like, man, if I just had a microphone right here for 24 hours and just kept it recording and got everyone's permission, the amount of content would be phenomenal.
GDPR may have some problems with that, I think. I know it's every time we have these preliminary calls, whenever I've done podcasts, it's like, oh, damn, I should have just recorded that one. Like, seriously. It always seems to bring up the best stuff, and then you just have to kind of refine it when you go through. But for anyone listening today, we have tried our best to refine it, and we'll do whatever we can to make sure we get everything through. So yeah, I mean, I've given a bit of an introduction to yourself, but today we're going to kind of hit on the 3 different sides of Will Slickers. And I know I've listened to a lot of your work. It's normally you and asking a lot of the questions. I do have some questions for you today, which I'm looking forward to hear some answers to. But yeah, the 3 sides we want to kind of get from you today, for at least from our side over at Tuya, is the number 1, the Will Slickers who work with short-term rentals. I know we want to talk a lot about that today. Number 2 is the Will who's worked in hotels. And then number 3 is the successful, let's say, fantastic podcast host. And then also alongside that, the range of industry connections you've built alongside that, because that's brought you, I know we spoke about it, a whole wealth of knowledge, speaking to some fantastic people. So we're kind of going to look a bit of a deep dive into those and kind of pluck your knowledge from each area of there and then see what we can find from that.
Perfect. Well, I'm excited for it. And yeah, it's definitely different being on the other side of the microphone asking the questions. So I'm excited to dive in. Let's do it.
So Will Slicker, this is your life. We're going to dive in.
I love
Well,
it.
anyway, I mean, we'll start with the short-term rental side. So
For sure.
just a bit of an intro to everyone here is what made you get into that in the first place? I know we spoke on for the introduction, you were 23 years old, single, wanted to go and work in short-term rentals. Why?
Well, I'm now 27, so a lot's changed since the writing of that bio on my website. But no, I think, getting into short-term rentals, especially in, I would say 2017, 18, was a really good time. I think the biggest thing founders or entrepreneurs or even people that grow exponential careers in the industry can realize, like, the right time and the right place is a real thing. Like we talk about, guest experience, and a lot of it's or like when you do room revenue, it's the right room to the right person at the right price at the right time, right? So like those all are key factors. And so for me, short-term rentals was the right time, the right place. And I started to see from my hotel world to the short-term rental world where things were very much different, and there was no black and white, or there was no gray. It was all black and white. Like you could definitely tell the difference between a hotel and a vacation rental. But my parents, long story short, were the ones that kind of really introduced me to it. They had long-term tenants at one of their little two-bedroom, two-bath apartment above their garage. They never use a garage, so there was no worry about the garage door opening and waking people up or doing anything like that. It was just an extra suite that they had, and the tenants that they were getting for long-term rent was just not very good. They were late to the paying rent, or they damaged hardwood floors because they were messy and didn't really care about anything, or whatever the situation may be. But then they heard about this thing called Airbnb, and they started asking me, because I was a front desk agent at the time. They're like, well, you run a hotel, so what would we need to do in order to take on guests on Airbnb? And that was kind of like a light bulb moment where I could see, okay, like this is a 1-unit room. Basically, if you look at it, it's a house or an apartment, but it's still 1 unit. You have one check-in, one checkout. There's no, you're not selling multiple rooms inside the one building. It's pretty much a one-room hotel is what I called it. So I just took the basic Marriott standards, right? It's like, okay, we need good white clean linens, you need kitchen amenities, you need comfortability for the living room, you need contactless check-in immediately was one of my things. Like, you don't want to track keys, you don't want to chase people down for keys, you don't want people getting locked out or whatever that whole situation may be, and you don't want to be having to be on site 24/7 in order to check people in. If they check in at 11 o'clock, like, do you really want to wait up until 11 to get them inside an apartment? No. So getting a smart lock was one of my first, this is what you should do if you're going to invest into this. And then of course, like the furnishings and the layout and the comfortability and occupancy, how do you maximize it? Do you put a king here? Do you put a queen there? And do you put bunk beds over there? Or what's the situation in order to get the comfortable amount of people? So yeah, that was the big aha moment, was seeing the standardization inside the hotel space. And then the tech part where, like, hotels, you have to go to the front desk. So it was like, with the smart lock, no one has to go to the front desk. They could just get their code, check in, and have a good experience. So that's kind of the entry point of me getting into short-term rentals.
It's interesting because you kind of answered my next question a little bit for me. It is that I know we're going to talk a lot about tech today, and you talk a lot about tech in your podcast, with IoT in mind as well, of course, but more for anything. The question was going to be that when you first got started in short-term rentals, did you have tech in mind that even before you got started, that you were like, right, this just has to be done from the beginning, which it seems like you did? Or did you find that there was also things that along the way, it was problem, or let's say issues that popped up and it's a bit more reactionary? You're like, okay, now to solve that problem, I need to do this. It seems like you had a lot of things planned out initially. Is the reason I say it is that I speak from personal experience. The example I like to give, and I've probably given it on a previous podcast, so sorry if you've heard it before, but it's that for me, growing up in like an old house in London, multiple times breaking windows to break into the house, I'm terrible at losing keys, but I never bought a smart lock, never pushed my parents to go and buy one either for the house. It's only once I moved here, and I live in China now, so every apartment out of the 7 I've lived in had a smart lock. So the issue is now that when I move out, it's going to be a huge bit of friction, right? Because going back to having the key will be a huge problem for me.
100%.
So there's some tech I feel that you can get motivated into doing through using it, and there's also some stuff that will just appear to solve the problem. But I do find that particularly with certain aspects of IoT that I love to say that everyone just has this like mindset that when they move into a new property or want to start a business, they just know exactly what they need. I haven't been like that myself, but it seems like from your side, you knew at least you wanted to have a smart lock enabled, which I think is the right choice, particularly for short-term rentals. And we'll
100%.
dive a bit into the difference today. But was there anything else that you had in mind that when you got started, particularly around IoT, that you were like, okay, I need this before I even begin? And then was there anything that as you moved on, you were like, okay, now this would be a good addition?
No, I think the big thing starting out with that property, and this was just me helping out. I was still working front desk. I was still doing all my stuff in Spokane. So, and there, if to put perspective, they were about a 5-hour drive from me. So this was all over the phone, kind of helping my dad via text or phone calls. And I do remember, at the front desk, we had this pretty much a detailed Excel spreadsheet, basically going into attractions, restaurants, things to do, all these random questions, transportation needs, airport shuttles. And this was actually in Washington. There was, best marijuana shops or the best this, like, people wanted to know all these certain things. Right. And so having that was a big perk for the hotel. And so with that being said, it was like, okay, well, I don't know what the questions people are going to ask for this apartment in a small little suburb of outside of Seattle, but I know that eventually we're going to need it. And my parents were smart. They actually were like, hey, we just put some basic house rules in this binder. And I was like, okay, like that's a good thing to have upon entry. But the biggest thing is the anticipation of a guest need, right? So like guests are anticipating for their stay. So how do you get that information to them prior to their arrival? And I didn't know how to solve that problem, but through the podcast, I started doing more interviews, definitely getting into more tech because I saw how much technology was playing a role in short-term rentals. And got to meet great people, for that create digital guidebooks. So it's a link, you put all this content in there, you can change it out whenever things change. You don't have to print off more paper. And, I think me personally as maybe, I don't know if I qualify as a millennial, I'm definitely not Gen Z, but, as a younger person, I don't want to show up to a property with dirty, sticky, touched, crumpled paper inside of a binder. I would rather just have everything on my phone, where it's easy access. I know where the Wi-Fi is at. I know, the recommended places to eat, stay, all that good stuff, outside of just a binder. So eventually throughout the business, or throughout them creating that property, it was more or less just creating that standardization. That was the biggest problem to solve in the beginning. And then after time went on, it was finding digital guidebooks and all the other extra stuff that we could do in order to prevent the issues of guests having questions and always reaching out. We wanted to really have that resource available. And then, to be honest, like with one property, you don't really need a property management software, right? So you don't need a whole PMS or anything like that going to connect. You can just connect to Airbnb directly. And so with that, it was more or less, okay, how do we automate this messaging? If we get a booking at midnight, how do I need to wake up and keep my response rate? No, there's, using the tools that are already built into the softwares was kind of the next biggest step for us. Yeah.
So that first property for you was kind of a bit of a testing ground, I guess, like a bit of a
100%. I told my parents that
before you scaled it, right?
Yeah, 100%. I told my parents, I was like, we're going to play with every toy that comes into the sphere of the podcast or something that I hear about, or if a guest mentions something, I'm going to dive into it and figure out what we can do. And that was, it was a very much a playground for us to create new ideas and have some fun with the whole hospitality short-term rental Airbnb wave that was happening at that time.
Interesting. And I mean, to jump back in your point then, talking about what businesses are nearby and what can I do in the city. I know I sent you a video a couple of days ago, and with a bit of a botched translation from my side, as we're currently going through the translation of it. I spoke about this in the last podcast, but what we're working on our side, at least in China at the moment, is kind of leveraging some of the ecosystem that works around WeChat and Alibaba here, and working on connected commerce, we call it. So this is the idea that more for hotels, let's say, in that besides running the IoT aspect, what we do is that through the same app the guests will be using to control, for example, the lights, they have specific deals from, let's say Jim's taco shop down the road, who says that, okay, between these hours, hotel guests will get this deal, come in 2-for-1 tacos, whatever. They can get that as exclusive for them, and they can find businesses nearby that way. So what we're trying to do at the moment, which is mostly happening here in mainland China for now, but we're trying to work on it internationally, is see if there's a way in which hotels can better interact with the local community. Because particularly we realize now that room service isn't quite cutting it for a lot of people, especially when you can get that same restaurant delivered straight to your door. So we've worked with hotels who are like, okay, we're realizing that we can't always pretend that our room service is the best. Some places are great, some places are kind of to drop it, but it's finding a way in which they can leverage these businesses nearby instead of just, for example, the guests using their third-party food delivery app. At least that then becomes part of the hotel experience. So I guess away from the IoT point, just out of curiosity, what have you seen being done around that internationally? And how do you think hotels or even short-term rental owners can better connect with a local business environment to, let's say, implement a seamless and more connected and more personalized hotel experience?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I think hotels overall have the upper hand on short-term rentals with that because the scalability, right? You have more inventory in one central location. Vacation rentals, that term is so broad in the sense of a vacation rental could be a single family home. Right. It could be an apartment above a garage. It could be a multifamily building with only 9 units inside out of the 120 that are mostly residential apartments, right? So I think, with that being said, hotels, and me and my business partner have said this multiple times because we were hotel guys, is that we feel like we failed in the sense of to pay attention to the 5 blocks around us, right? So how do we utilize that 5 blocks? That 5-block radius is really really important for that guest to understand, the community, the culture, and of course to feel like they don't want to feel like they're at home all the time. They want that experience of adventure. So that part I definitely think hotels have the upper hand on. And short-term rentals doesn't mean that you don't have that opportunity to do it. We do it right now. So we have a couple of properties in West Seattle. I'm just using this as an example, but getting really intentional with the local experience is really important, I think. Granted, we don't have the scalability like a hotel does to say, hey, we can send you probably 120 guests a weekend, right? But we can say we can send you quality guests that are dying for this type of experience, and they'll probably be really great for your restaurant, for your brewery, your coffee shop, whatever it may be. And it's actually taking up. So, I guess to not throw too much out to you at this answer, but what we've realized too is, like, if you're a hotel and you have a brand, restaurants, theme parks, any type of local attraction, they'll recognize that brand. Like people recognize brands. And if you're just saying, hey, I have a house down the street and you have no branding, no messaging, no type of theme, is like, yeah, I have a house down the street and we love to do this. Like, yeah, that may work for some smaller businesses, but if you want a really good quality business, they're going to look at you and be like, okay, so does everybody else that comes here, right? But what we realized with us presenting our brand and communicating what our brand means and why our guests stay with us and telling that story, the restaurants and local attractions definitely take more into heart of, oh yeah, this would be really fun. So now they're giving us growlers to put into the home prior to, and giving them 15% off for a growler fill up, which most guests when they walk in to go get a growler won't get 15% off, but they stay with us, they get that opportunity. So long story short, and to answer your question and kind of wrap that up, is hotels have that opportunity for the scalability and the centralization of their property and the units and the amount of guests that they'll have at a certain time and period. But vacation rentals doesn't mean you can't do that. I think it just needs to be more intentional, and of course finding a way to streamline it. You don't want to be chasing multiple, you're already working with a lot of guests if you have multiple properties, so don't be chasing 20 other businesses to try to get these experiences. Really try to streamline it, form good partnerships and relationships. And of course, the best part about being in this business, as we kind of talked about in the very beginning, is data research, right? So you get to go to these places, take your friends, take your family, have that experience yourself, so that way you can properly communicate it into the experience that the guest is going to have with you as well.
Interesting. I think I agree with you in that when we designed it here, especially, it was focused more on the hotel, particularly in the way in which we designed the tech from our side. Is that I think from the video I sent you, I can share it to everyone after this, is that we worked alongside some of the larger companies here in developing facial recognition pads, which obviously are a bit more sensitive internationally. So the idea is that that whole hotel experience is that you can choose to take your card or your RFID, but it can all be totally contactless, both within the hotel. I've been to hotels that we operate with this, is that I walk through, scan my face, I can walk into the room. Once I get to the door now, what we're planning on, or what we're implementing at least, is that the same pad that scans my face to get into the room, and I can also see on there, okay, would you like to try out 50% off downstairs at the local restaurant? I can click that, and without having to do anything, that because it's registered with Alibaba and Alipay, which is obviously based in mainland China, it's automatically, let's say, attributed to my account, which means that when I choose to go down to the hotel or the bar later on, that's already there. So they will then have the same device in the restaurant, which was used to scan me when I came into the hotel. So I just scan my face again, it registers that, and the deal's automatically loaded. So that's kind of how we're trying to do it here with tech, not to give too much away because we're trying to find ways to do it internationally. But we're just trying to find ways to kind of connect, like you say, those 5 blocks around the hotel or the vacation rental. It's fake. I guess facial recognition is an easy way to do it here in China. It's just we're trying to figure out ways that are a bit less sensitive internationally to way to technologically connect it, because we've been doing it for years, right? Businesses and hotels have always had their guidebook of what's nearby. It's just
100%.
on the way to automate that, and trying to find a more technologically advanced way of doing it. But it's going to be a few years, but it's exciting to see what we're doing here actually, and just like the ridiculously enhanced level of convenience that we're seeing here has been interesting from my side to watch. But I guess first, because we've been focusing on IoT, I guess we'll dive into that a bit more today, because what we just spoke about there is probably a few more years to come. So I mean,
I was gonna say that for that kind of experience that you're kind of talking about, and this is definitely way off topic, but that experience that you're talking about is the direction I think all of travel needs to go. And I had a very interesting conversation with Adam Harris, who's a co-founder and CEO of Cloudbed. So talking about like you and I, when we're traveling, you're more likely probably going to book an Uber right to your airport. You're going to stick with a particular airline, whatever your preferred one is. And then you usually, if it's a quick business trip, you're going to stay in a hotel. You're not going to stay in a vacation rental. You don't need all that space. You don't need to go through all that. So you're more likely going to pick your favorite brand, unless you got a boutique one that's, high and true that you always ride or die with. But that experience of you checking in, scanning your face, getting that 15% off at the local bar downstairs, them recognizing that when you get to the bar and do the same thing over again, that's seamless, right? You don't have to worry about wait staff or bartenders to apply that code and do all this and do all the paperwork behind the scenes. And the same thing should be applying. So anyone listening, this is a big travel industry startup that I think it's going to be the biggest challenge to create. But if someone does it, I'm going to give major hats off to you. But creating a seamless experience that my Uber is connected to my airline app that knows that when my airline lands and when my plane, deplanes or whatever the whole scenario is, that when I get my bag, or if I just have my carry-on, that I walk outside, my Uber is waiting for me. And it knows from that app and that experience that I'm going to the X, Y, and Z Marriott property, and it's going to take me right there. I don't have to do all this manual stuff. That travel itinerary experience needs to be so seamless that even when you get to the property, right? Like we're talking about 15% off. Definitely years away, but I think, when we're talking about the future of travel and tech and experience, people, it's going to come to the point with Amazon Prime, right? You want it now, and then you want it seamlessly. You want it to integrate very positively into your life, right? You don't want to have more and more friction points to remember this, and then I typed in the wrong address on my Uber, so now I'm in the wrong location, and the hotel messed up my reservation. Like, you don't want any of that. That stuff needs to all connect in the future. And it was a great conversation I had with them about that. And I think what you guys are doing, what you're talking about, kind of plays a big role of, the integration internally of a property to then have that project on the outside of Uber, airplanes, all the other stuff.
I think this is a whole other conversation we can dive into as well. Like, China's really well suited for it. To me, living in China is just the most convenient place I think I've ever lived in many ways with regards to tech. And that's really backed up by WeChat and Alipay ecosystem, in that like everything is connected through the same platform, right? Which we don't really have in the West. It's all quite separate. But for me, like, I can leave that, not so much myself. I normally have to take at least my phone. But for locals, if you want to go grocery shopping, you can literally take nothing. You can walk in, pay with your face as you walk out, and it's all connected via Alipay. So that's kind of what you can ride off here. And there's a much more, let's say, connected ecosystem that can support that. So that is a business idea in the West that can be jumped on. It's going to be more complicated because we run on more fragmented systems. But for us, for example, the small business owner nearby, he already has an Alibaba or Alipay face scanning machine in there anyway. It's not just a QR code scanning one. So it's just saying, okay, look, let's make sure we're all using the same one now. And then I can bring your business. So that was really easy for us to build on top of. We're just still brainstorming how we can do it internationally, and particularly, especially without facial recognition would be a key point. But I think I would, for anyone listening as well, and I guess for yourself, is that have a look into how hotels here are operating on top of that ecosystem. WeChat menu programs are a really interesting one when it comes to things like room service, and seeing how hotels are already beginning to increase that degree of convenience. Like for us, it jumps back to what you said, right, about adding to that seamless experience. And we initially did that with IoT. We kind of tend to have that quite covered now, we think. So we're trying to move on to what's outside of the hotel. But yeah, it's an interesting one. And I will say, I guess unashamedly, we are a bit more ahead here, particularly in terms of that adoption. On, let's say, the payments front, it's, Alipay and WeChat here. And then on the IoT side, which I can jump into, is a lot to do with supply chain, actually, is that a lot of the hardware is coming out of here. So it kind of jumped straight into the market initially, and a lot of hotels test it out and see what works, see what doesn't. And it just gets trusted and it becomes more familiar much more quickly. So for me here now, it's a given that every hotel I go into, regardless of whether or not it's the 2-star beach shack or the 5-star, will have some degree of IoT that's being implemented. But I guess throughout the call today, we'll jump in a bit more. Let's say for the most or majority of our listeners that we have, the situation actually is real right now on the ground, particularly in the US. So I think we'll dive back into vacation rentals. We'll kind of jump off the path.
Sorry, I was going to say, didn't mean to take us on a whole sidetrack there, but it's, I think I was like, it fits kind of perfectly with what you were talking about. But yeah, we can get back on track now.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't even on my list of things to cover today, but again, I think we've been thinking about it the past few days. So it was definitely worth talking. But yeah, let's dive back in vacation rentals. So from your side as well, that when you first started running, let's say your crash test dummy, when you were doing your parent department, you had the chance to implement certain technologies. And then as you began to scale that, with IoT in mind, so not just so much for everything, which aspects did you consider to be like, okay, I need to implement this? Like the obvious one would be access control. So with smart locks, you can cover. Was there anything else outside of smart locks you thought would be useful? Or was that like just the number one and we can consider everything else later?
That was the number one right at the beginning. But then again, like, and this property in particular, I think had probably the better upper hand of being a test dummy, because my parents lived right next door. So any guests that were coming to stay at that 2-bedroom apartment didn't, like, they had privacy. They had full blown privacy. Nobody could see in, nobody can go, they had their own private balcony, all this other stuff. But the fact that my parents' house was right next door, I think definitely helped prevent that party type of guest that would come in. And we communicated that in the description. The owners live right next door. You have your own private entrance, private parking, private everything. But just an FYI, the Wi-Fi is very slow because we're in a remote destination. So if you're here to do remote work or Zooms or anything like that, it's probably not a good fit. But if you're also here, like, to, if you're going to have a get together, make sure it's a small and quiet one, because the owners do live right next door. So that prevented a lot of that party type scene showing up, because vacation rentals sometimes get a bad name for parties. But when it comes to IoT devices, even though they do live next door, they do like to travel, they do have events and certain things that they go to, so they're not home 24/7. And so we did implement noise monitoring. So not recording, not Alexa, not all that type of stuff, but really just measuring decibel levels to make sure that when there was a time to be quiet, that the quiet hours were implemented, and we didn't have to worry about guests having a little crazy get together that turns out of hand. And so that was the next one that we implemented, and it works out great. The Wi-Fi was strong enough to hold the device, so it didn't kick it off and have to reconnect and disconnect and reconnect and disconnect. And yeah, it comes in very good use for us, saying, okay, like, the access code was used at this time of date, and then the party started at this time of date, and we can kind of tell to kind of fight any type of refunds or damage deposits and stuff like that. So for that property in particular, that was the only real IoT differences that we did, was the access control, noise monitoring for party prevention, and then the rest was just some kind of software implementation when it came to the guidebook and other stuff like that.
It's interesting because access control is always the number one from the people we speak to, and that's what we definitely had in mind when we first developed our software products, which I can touch on. But one thing we didn't really consider, which we found out later on, was about noise monitoring, specifically something towards vacation rentals that we didn't really get so much from hotels. Like, this is something so specific to vacation short-term rentals that everyone we speak to these days in that line of work is like, we need something for noise monitoring. Hotels don't really tend to give us that much feedback on that because they have someone in the building at all times and it's traceable. But for us, we realized that, particularly in Europe, for example, when you have these old buildings and you have an apartment that's on the 3rd floor with no kind of noise protection, if you have one complaint, you're no longer hosting short-term rentals. You're done, basically. So it's like critical to the business. It's that alongside the access control, like you say, provide something really traceable, which streamlines the operations, but also when worst case scenario hits and you have your angry neighbor or worse, the police coming to you, you'd be like, look, okay, here's all the evidence for everything. Here's what we told them in the first place. Here's how everything is traceable for what went wrong. So it's kind of, let's say, damage prevention and reaction to that, as well as streamlining the operations, which we didn't get that much feedback on it on the hotel side. They were more, let's say, about the actual physical property of the building as well. So regarding sensors, that was more around things such as water leak sensors, people having trouble, leaving the bathtub or leaving the sink open, or if there was a leak in the room, because that completely can ruin the guest experience, not just for the person living in that room, but for the one on the floor below as well. We're seeing increasing uptake in apartments for that. But yeah, again, the two you've just highlighted were like the number two, or the two top ones we've had for short-term rentals, to be honest with you. And I think I'd agree with you. It's like, the thing we'll kind of move on to towards today is that when does IoT become a necessity and a perk, right? For example, when we look at things in short-term rentals, is having lighting or smart lighting a necessity at the moment? I think even from our side, we can argue potentially not, particularly if you're just managing one property. It's still at the stage of a perk. Something we were discussing in previous episodes was how long is that going to remain a perk for? With increasing adoption of smart homes, particularly during the pandemic, at which point do you move into a property and realize that, okay, this doesn't work in the same way as my house, so I'm downgrading, But for now, I don't think we're there. I think my question for you on the next point is, for short-term rentals, do you think there's anything in the short to near term that if you're not implementing it now, regarding IoT, that you should really put it on your list? And outside of that, do you think there's anything that you can kind of put off for the next 3 or 4 years?
That's a good question, and it's a hard one as well. I think so. I know not a lot of people have the ability to do it, depending on the property, and of course, if you're single family or multifamily. But I think the smart thermostat, the Ecobee sensors, or I think, like you said, the lights are a great perk, but eventually I would say within 1 to 2 years, if we're going to go to more a sustainability model of operating a building or a property, right? We need to be able to control the temperature, control the pool heater, control the lighting, control the, everything that gives us a monthly bill, right? So you got water, power, and heat usually, but depending on where you're at, you might not have heat because it might be included in power or whatever. But I think, implementing more things like that have automated triggers to know that, okay, if check-in's at 3 p.m., right? An hour before, we're going to kick in the AC because it's 90 degrees in Florida and, the house has been empty for 3 days, so it probably got a little warm, that type of stuff. Okay, an hour before the guests check in, or before they're technically checking in, they could always check in later, that, that automation of anticipation of the guests are going to be tired. It's going to probably be a long travel day. They're most likely have kids because they're going to Florida for Disney World. And, the kids probably were nightmares and terrors to their parents because they were so excited and they're sleep deprived and all this other stuff, right? So AC is really important, and making sure that's automated. You don't have to worry about having your housekeeper who may or may not remember to turn the thermostat down to the certain temperature, right? So I know when we were in hotels, the big thing that was on our housekeeper checklist was the turning down of the thermostat and setting it to a certain degree upon every turnover of a property. And with that comes human error. So human error is that we have a checklist, we have a certain amount of inventory to turn over in a certain time period. So we're going. Not going to always remember to turn the thermostat to 67 degrees. So the IoT of, a smart thermostat, and then of course going into the lights and pool sensors and other things like that, super important, because again, when you're managing a vacation rental, small or single family home or multifamily unit, these amenities, these automations and technology allow us to be hands off, in the sense of not having to have a 24/7 staff, not having to be there in like a hotel, which is really unique. And I think a lot of travelers actually want, they want that touch and go of, communicating with a human. So I would say, to, again, try to answer your question, I think getting more into those automated stuff, the thermostats, the noise sensors, access control. We even played with, again, one of our property owners bought it. I'm using the Florida example because it's a real life property for us. And as we told them, hey, like, this property is our first and only one in Florida. We want to play with these new tools and toys. And if you give us permission, then we're going to do it. And so we've been playing with guest guides upon entry. So not just a digital guidebook, but, giving them a screen that's like a virtual check-in where they accept the house rules. They give their impression of the property upon arrival. So you kind of already know where they're at when it comes to a review. Instead of getting a 1 star upon checkout, you can get a 3-star upon check-in and reach out and be like, hey, everything okay? What's going on? And kind of make sure, how can we get that to a 5? Certain things like that. I think that if that hopefully answers your question, to go into that, I think it's more or less getting focused on giving your, and COVID was a big learning lesson for all of us, is giving your guests the flexibility and the option, right? They don't have to they don't have to do anything with the thermostat. They don't have to do certain things with the pool and do all this upon arrival. But if they want to have that more custom experience, they can choose it. So
I think
hopefully, yeah.
It does very nicely answer the question. I think it kind of highlights perhaps a big difference as well with vacation rentals and hotels, and also kind of leads into why our team, particularly at 2 did what we did, and build the business that we built. So, I mean, the difference, especially from your side, is that you kind of had your crash test apartment, let's say, with your mum and dad's place, that you could test out all the tech you wanted to first. And again, the same reason is that when you said you don't need the PMS, it kind of works similarly with IoT before, in that what we were building previously, a lot was to do with smart home. If you just had one smart property or smart apartment, you can check your guest in and you can pimp it out as smart as you want. It's super easy to manage and it's not really a big deal. And we saw people were doing that. But the feedback we were getting was that, particularly in the vacation rental space, was that, okay, now like I've got 4, 5, 6 apartments. I've got one smart home app. This is a real nightmare to manage. And then this is going beyond the idea of what it's meant to do. It's no longer intuitive. It's no longer smart. It's now just a complete headache. So that was kind of the light bulb moment for us, is that because what we do at 2 always is that we don't do what we call B2C markets. We work in B2B for IoT. So the idea is that people come to us and say, look, I want to build an IoT solution for XYZ industry. And we see if there's a way to do it. One way was that initially we do plug and play solutions, which for smart home was that you just can, we call it OEM app, but it's a white label service to build your own app. And then we source all the hardware as well to be white labeled. And then we realized for not just hospitality, but residential, and then I guess looking more towards communities and cities, was that there wasn't really what we believed to be enough, let's say, comprehensive solution providers for the mass management of IoT devices in these particular industry verticals. Particularly when we looked at hospitality, we saw there were some players in the market. I know you speak with some and they do great work, but we still thought it wasn't enough. So what we do is that we first build a SaaS platform for the management of multiple, let's say, vacation rentals or hotels or apartments. So you can manage, 100, 200,000, whatever, say thermostats or smart lock sensors across a full range of properties around the world, just from one platform. And that's the idea. And the point is that that can be white labeled and then resold. So our vision is not to be going into, for example, your apartment and selling you a service. That's not what we do. On a very basic level, if you're a business that believes you can sell that service, we can give you a plug and play solution to do so. And if not, I think what we work with a lot more at the moment is that there's more, let's say, businesses who've been in the game for a while. They're trying to automate the whole hotel process, and there've been some really visionary people out doing it. And what we say is that because we're B2B, we essentially open up our IoT platform. So just again, to encourage people to start implementing more IoT as they go, because we connected maybe 2,200 now different types of IoT devices onto our system. And we've also built industry specific solutions for hospitality. So if there's businesses, for example, you're looking to build hotel apps, we say, look, if you want to incorporate IoT into it, we're here to help. Just come to us, we'll consult with you and see what we can do. So that's kind of what we want to try and do with it. It's jumping back to it is, it's fine if you're a short-term rental owner and you just want to operate one smart home, you can do that. But when you move forwards, you need to consider what you're doing with scaling that up, which we'll jump on in a sec. And then particularly what we're trying to do is just make that more accessible for people, to see how they can deploy it and kind of play with it in different ways, and see if we can push for that implementation across the industry. From our feedback at the moment, what we see is mostly, as you can imagine, around smart locks. People are just like, look, I need a mass smart lock solution. I think that can be my business. And then more people on the next point are moving into sensors and then also thermostats. And I guess that will kind of lead me on to the next question for you, is that having worked on both sides of the coin with short-term rentals and hotels, is we see there's different motivations for people. For example, on the smart lock front, that for vacation rental managers, that solves a very immediate problem because there's no front desk. So having that smart lock available means that, again, you no longer have to send someone there at 11 p.m., right? Realistically, for the hotel, let's say pre-COVID, it wasn't a necessity in that there was still going to be someone to pass over an RFID card, and they can get into the property, no problem. It's when we try and compare short-term rentals, perhaps hotels, there's some things that are particular core motivators. And the thermostat example is one that kind of rings home for us with hotels in terms of energy management. So we get a lot more feedback from hotels saying, look, I've got 200-300 rooms. Energy management is a huge priority. I've already got locks in place with cards or keys that I can live with for now. But I'm bleeding cash on energy, which I can't be affording to do at the moment. So for you, I guess the question I want to bring forwards is, as we move into Will Slickers number 2, the hotel Will Slickers, is what technologies do you think in regard to IoT are more attractive, let's say, for hoteliers who are managing large numbers of rooms in regards or in comparison to, say, the short-term rental owner who's managing 5 different properties?
Can you say that question one more time?
So comparing now is, if I'm a short-term rental owner who's got, let's say, 5 properties, and then I'm a large-scale hotelier who's got 200-300 beds plus. When we look at IoT, so from our side, that, for example, the smart lock was one that had instant value and much more attraction from short-term rental owners. Less so, but more it's building now with hotels. But then we look at hoteliers and we look at increased demand for things like energy saving solutions with thermostats. Do you think there's anything from your side in terms of the difference with IoT implementation in short-term rentals and then also in hotels?
I see, it's interesting that hotels, like, I understand why they go towards that direction of, eco-friendly in the sense of their electric or water costs, other things like that. Like, this is probably a hefty bill, one that I would probably be sticker shocked if I saw. And so I understand why that, but I think we're at a time in travel and hospitality overall that people are wanting a different system, and we talked about this before jumping on the recording, but it's interesting that a hotel would go that route, outside of obvious reasons, because I think a lot of guests really don't want to queue up at a front desk anymore, and they want that that smart check-in, whether it's through the Marriott app or through a kiosk in the lobby or whatever it may be. So I think access control still is an issue, and maybe this is definitely like hence commenting towards like the US and even just maybe Canada or anywhere else outside of China. And so I think it's an interesting choice of going to that way, because that brings no value to the guests, it brings all value to the property. And when it comes to the operations, I always remembered the endless checklist as a front desk agent, right? You have an AM, a mid, and a PM checklist in order to double check reservations and do all these mundane tasks that make no freaking sense on why we need to do with its legacy software and all this other stuff that's going on behind the scenes. So I think the new direction and the kind of the where short-term rentals are excelling at but also failing is that I don't know how to really put a name on it, but guests want to choose what they experience, and I think we need to get rid of the friction points on the guest experience side when it comes to access to controlling the room temperature prior to their arrival, to all this other stuff via IoT. But then we also need to get rid of them on that checklist, AM, midday, and PM checklist on the front desk side, and give the staff the more opportunity through technology and IoT to really enhance the guest experience. I would much rather have if I had a hotel, much rather have my front desk agent be focused on making sure that Dylan's stay was phenomenal. And not only did his room fit the requirement for his trip, but that everything was preset. And then, of course, he had a list and he had a reservation and he had shuttle pickup and he had all these certain things, right, in order to really carry out the rest of the stay. It's not just about the check-in experience, it's about the whole thing. And when your staff are able to be more focused on those types of issues, is Dylan getting to his dinner reservation on time? Did I get him the best restaurant for him and his girlfriend to have a great anniversary dinner? Or X, Y, and Z? Can I help him plan a proposal? Not that you are planning to propose, but more or less just like using it. Like, these are certain moments, right, that I would much rather have my team focusing on, because that type of activity and energy is going to benefit my bottom line, which is profitability, it's nightly rate, it's occupancy. Those things matter more. So if tech and IoT in a hotel or a vacation rental can help me do that and get rid of the, oh, sorry, Mr. Dillon, I can't help you right now because I'm busy doing 20,000 things on a small computer screen that make no sense and probably could be automated in some shape or form, right? Like, that's the biggest thing. So I don't know if that's really answering your question, but when it comes to hotels, I think hotels need to start looking at that as a big play. IoT and tech solving a lot of the operation headaches to make the guest experience so more extreme that the guests are always going to be coming back, and that's going to drive up the profitability. And then you can use the IoT, such as thermostats and water and all this other stuff, to really start saving money while increasing the experience. So like, save money goes down and then experience goes up. That means more profitability, that means higher rates, that means more occupancy, that means you're overall doubling the revenue that you would have made. Or yeah, anyways, that's a whole tangent, but hopefully that answers your question on that one, because I think there's positives and minuses. Vacation rentals are gone super heavy. There's so many options, right? There's so many individual players, right? There's no big brands. There are big brands, but there's not a ton like a Marriott or a Hyatt or a Hilton or IHG or whatever that may be. So there's so much technology to be thrown at us that it could be overbearing. And then hotels, I feel like they're just slower to adopt it. So it's like, okay, if you just did this one thing, right, your guest experience would be so much better. So yeah, that's kind of my soapbox there.
I think the interesting thing you've highlighted, which a lot of people often miss around IoT, particularly in hotels, is the common misconception that calling it a smart hotel, which we spoke about a few weeks ago, was a bit of a problem, just refers to the guest room and maybe the lock, which to us, the in-room automation piece is just kind of one part of the puzzle of having this interconnected business as the hotel, right? And implementing IoT across the experience. The guest experience can be improved alongside management processes along the whole way of the journey from the second before they even get to the hotel. So it can start with things like parking, right? Registering there at the hotel. The full connected experience involves them first checking in before they arrive to the hotel. They will then be recognized that their car, for example, has arrived in the parking lot through smart parking sensors. Then the full connected experience would say that, okay, I know that the temperature in the room for this guest, they need it to be at 25 degrees, blah, 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 blah. This to us is the future of what's going to be happening. And we are implementing it at the moment. But the thing to focus on at the moment for us, particularly in regards to hotels and the connected experience, is yes, you can have the in-room automation. It's a really good perk for people, as long as you give the guest the choice to automate their room in the stay in the way that they would traditionally. For example, the light switch should always still be on the wall. You shouldn't just be relying on Alexa. But what we encourage people to focus more on is more actually about, I guess conversely to what you said actually, is more on the operation side. Not just for the idea of streamlining your operations to make things easier for your staff, but then how does that then translate back into the guest experience, like you said, right? So, the check-in's an obvious one. If you have someone handling details all the time at the front desk, they're not present to speak to the guests. And then when you jump back to what you said about your property in Florida, that first impression is really important, right? And that check-in piece, and I know it's a bit of a cliche and it's turning into more and more one at the moment, is that the technology isn't there to replace staff. It's there to enhance them, but it's hard to avoid it. It's a true cliche.
It's so true. And sorry to cut you off, but it's the most underestimated statement, I think, in hospitality. I think we definitely need to look at it differently. We need to stop saying I'm on webinars and podcasts and really actually apply it to the property. Because if we truly care about, our profit and loss statements and all the things that go in behind the scene of a business, then I think, we need to stop being, cash scared, if that makes sense, or we need to start implementing cash right out of the gate. Take the bullet, take the risk. Where if you're a hotel owner or a vacation rental owner or a manager, you've already taken the risk to be a self-employed operator, right? You're an entrepreneur. You've already taken that risk. So why not increase that a little bit more, 5%, maybe 10%, and go out and get that done. So that way you can really focus on, like, if you're really passionate about hospitality and people and not just being a heads and beds type property, then that is so important to invest in. So that way your team is on the same mission, because they can't be on the same mission if they are so focused and worried about this mundane task list that has nothing to do with their overall job, and that's to take care of the guests, to take care of their team, and to of course drive revenue through experience. So yeah, I think it's super underestimated and underutilized in application.
For us, I think it's all about choice, both with IoT and without. It's about giving the guests the full flexibility to choose when they get the hotel exactly how they want that stay to go. And I don't think any guest chooses to wait in line for 20 minutes at check-in. That's not a choice I would personally make. But it's allowing your staff to be flexible to support that guest who wants a little bit more, for example, from their stay. If they're looking for that extra service from the staff when they arrive at the hotel, that's now available with the check-in piece. And then once they're in the room on the choice side, it's kind of the thing I touched upon, is they can choose how they interact with it, to remove that friction we spoke about earlier. So if I want to just flick the light switch, that's fine. If I'm used to using Alexa, that's also no problem. It's just opening up the options for the guests, which at the moment still remains a perk for the majority. I know you have the smart tech at home, so it's over time that will turn away from being a perk and an expectation, which we'll talk about in different podcasts. But
for sure,
that it's us, or from our side, it's again reducing the burden on staff through the implementation of tech. And a good way of doing that is making sure the guests' needs are being met through using that technology, right? And I think IoT from our side is quite a good way to do that. Problems, for example, with light switches in rooms, or something's not working in the room, or I didn't have to turn my lights, grandma's come around to stay. That can be handled from the front desk. I can operate the property. I can change the temperature for you instead of having to come and send someone up, things like this, which massively enable your staff to focus more on giving time towards the guests. And that's how we focus on implementing IoT.
For sure. It's like, the biggest thing too is, it's so funny when you book a hotel room or a short-term rental, right? You're already giving your credit card info. You're most likely giving out more information about your address and phone number and email and all the stuff. So then getting to the property to then queue up and then to also give that same information again, and then also give your credit card that you already entered online again, it makes no sense. So there's a lot of stuff. And to be honest, a lot of people on the operations side think guests don't want to deal with this. Guests are more likely to do their own mobile check-in, and when they're booking the reservation, if they've already given you that information, there's no need to ask for it again. We should be automatically storing it, and then obviously being private and safe and secure with all that information. But automatically, when it's time to check in, they should just be able to hit check in, and it should charge the card. It should verify. Maybe they do a passport or an ID scan or something like that. But at the end of the day, they shouldn't have to get that stuff again. And that shouldn't be a task that a front desk agent needs to do. If they've already used that to book, why duplicate it and make it, another, challenge for yourself and for the guests, and for them to be like wondering in the back of their head while they're standing there looking at a front desk agent who's literally like this, like typing away the same information that they should already have. Yeah, it makes no sense. And I think, we're gonna get to that point where, I think we're gonna see a challenge and pushback from travelers when it comes to that. Vacation rentals are a little bit different, and I know there's chargebacks and stuff like that in hotels, and there's a big concern with chargebacks and how that all works. But I think majority of our travelers and our guests are responsible adults and are able to handle their own mobile check-in process. And short-term rentals, they collect, most properties that, or companies I know, collect 100% of the money up front upon booking. Sometimes maybe 50%, stuff like that. But another thing, and this is definitely for another podcast at another date and time, but if airlines are getting away with charging customers upon booking full amount, no refunds, you have 24 hours and that's it. And they're pretty ruthless when it comes to it, even if you have status. Like, why are we now not doing the same thing in the hotel world? Why are we allowing guests to cancel within 48 hours of booking and getting refunded and doing all this stuff? Like, we need to start thinking about payment and the check-in, which I know it's kind of biased of me to say because I was a front desk guy originally. So of course I'm going to be talking about check-ins more than probably anything else. But that whole process, like you said, first impressions are very key. And unfortunately, if you're front desk, you're the first impression. So why not remove that barrier?
Interesting. I think to me, that particularly is something that we're at the stage of now. It's becoming an expectation for the guest. That check-in process is now probably one of the first things we're seeing shift from our side, of becoming a nice perk, having the self check-in and having everything automated, particularly from us on the IoT side. And it's turning into, if I go to a hotel that doesn't have it, particularly let's say in a metropolitan city area, you're like, okay, something's not quite right here. And that first impression you think is that, okay, this hotel is likely not going to meet my standards as I get into the room as well, because I've already had a headache, right? That is something, as we see, as the ultimate of entry points, particularly in the IoT front, for sure. And making sure the guests, especially when they have that first impression to the hotel, it's smooth. It's from our side, when we look to the next stage of implementation, it's things, how shall I say, is when we put the guest into the guest room, we see now we're at a stage of more of a transition. Is for the check-in process, we're at a point of like, it's becoming an expectation. As we enter the guest room now, Alexa's becoming more and more prevalent in the rooms. A level of voice control, particularly in terms of room service, is getting there. We do some really interesting work with the Alexa hospitality team, and that's going to be up and coming, something to watch in the next few years. Increasing the range of control for the guests once they get into the room. We're going to see increasing from our side, mostly on new build properties, because like I say, when we talk about having the base level of control for grandma who would like to, again, flick the light switch as she gets into the room, that's always going to be there. We're now at a point where, particularly with our suppliers, is that we have, let's call it a dumb switch and a smart one that's going to be there for the same price. So with new builds, a lot more hotels are saying, okay, let's have the smart option available for the guest, because why not? And that's going to be something that, similar to the check-in, is going to start turning more from a perk into an expectation than a reality for the guest. So that's something to watch out for, I think, for hoteliers. But beyond that, I think the next thing, which is a bit counterintuitive, I guess, towards us, is looking at your experience as Will Slickers number 3. And then the Will Slickers who's had this breadth of knowledge and industry connections through your podcast series and the work you do with Hospitality FM, is we love to talk about the benefits of implementing the tech. But I think I'll ask this in 2 parts. There's a lot of things that hoteliers often don't consider. when they're looking to implement things. Like, for example, from our side, we saw that there's a lot of isolated systems still. So we see someone who says, look, I need self-check-in now. So they go and source a self-check-in company or a contactless access company. And the problem we're seeing is that these systems still don't interconnect very well. And that's a big pitfall, right? So they say, okay, now I want to add a degree of energy management. I now need to go and find my energy management company. So from Tuya, we try and do as much as we can, just because we have the IoT platform there. But the key point from us with that is the pitfall we saw initially was that people are trying to connect these isolated systems, which is just completely counterintuitive to being smart, right? And it just adds more operational headaches. So from your side and from your experience, I mean, what do you think hoteliers or short-term rental managers should look out for and consider when implementing tech? Is there things that they see which at a glance may look awesome, but in the long term with tech implementation in mind, they should think, okay, how should I handle this better?
Good question. And I think that, a lot of my answer would go to we're talking about flexibility on the guest side, right? So guests want flexibility in how they experience a property, and how they experience the destination as a whole. So when you're looking at IoT from a hotel or even a short-term rental standpoint, I think looking at the players that have not just the most integrations, but the best integrations. And I think that's the biggest thing, is to be flexible on the operations side, because I can't say this as a blanket statement, but hotels, when you stay at a hotel, most of them are pretty standardized in the sense of how they look, feel, and operate, right? There's not a lot of different models. Of course, there's hybrid models, or there's maybe a couple different independent boutique properties that have different types of experiences and shapes and forms, and they kind of get really creative, right? But when it comes to short-term rentals, we're not seeing that every short-term rental business is the same as the other. We're seeing a lot of different players. And so with that, every different model or every different company needs a little bit of different tech stack, different IoT stack, all that stuff. And so I think when it comes to that, if you're looking into companies to handle access control, to handle noise, to handle this, to handle that, don't just, grab the first one you find on Google. Look deeply into who they integrate with, look deeply into their reviews, look deeply into, how long they've been around. Not that that's a big difference, but there's a lot of new players that are coming up and they have a solid product, but more or less, like, make sure that you're finding the right solution that aligns with your goal and that they integrate well. You don't pick a property management software that doesn't integrate with your access control, that doesn't integrate with your revenue management system. It doesn't integrate, like, that does you a big disservice. Yeah. So you pick the one that does integrate with the management software that you want in the sense of revenue, the access control, or you pick a software that has all of them, right? We're getting to that point in the day and age where, the tech no longer needs to be so fragmented. Why not have a property management software that has its own access control, that has its own operation backend, that has its own revenue management backend in one unified dashboard? I'm tired of seeing multiple tabs open on my web browser. I'm tired of seeing front desks having multiple windows and softwares running at once. Just do something that should be very seamless and communicative when it comes to the technology. So when it comes to that, I think definitely be super intentional with who you're working with in that shape and form. Fix the headaches of the past, right? You don't want a long to-do list for your front desk. You don't want a long to-do list for your inspectors, for your housekeepers, for anything like that. You want a seamless connection solution. So that's my biggest thing, is look at the integrations, look at how you can customize the workflow to your operation and your brand and your experience.
Perfect. I think that's a nice point to wrap up on, and it kind of just hints on what we try and do here from our side, which I'll just kind of leave on that note. For sure. Is that for us, again, the integration, or the problem we saw around was, again, how well does this integrate in the existing systems? We saw lots of IT companies providing one piece of the puzzle. We said, look, let's try and provide as much as we can at one time. So that in one system that we can integrate as many PMSs with, that we can provide as many IoT fragments as possible, from access control all the way through to water management or whatever else, parking management. We try and cover all the bases on that. But again, our business vision is always B2B. So the interesting point you kind of said is that we're now at a point in which we could like to see PMSs having everything in one dashboard. And that's more what we'd like to try and service at the moment. So those companies who can have everything, and those who want to incorporate IoT into their existing product or their software operations, us at TUYA are here to help that. And we open up everything we need, because in future, our goal is, just like you say, to have more companies out there who can provide as much as possible, particularly on the software level, and reduce the need for countless integrations and web pages on one end. We're just trying to hope for a more open world, particularly in terms of tech, in which it's just much more accessible, I guess, is the message we're looking to push.
For sure. No, I love it. And like we were talking about, that Uber to airline to hotel experience, that's a B2C side. I think, what you guys are doing at B2B, that's what we need as well. Operators need that internally, so that way then we have the free time to go create a B2C option that is very well integrated with, with overall hospitality. I love that you're talking about as Alibaba, right? It's a stand. Hey, let's just all use the same system. That way our guests aren't having to relearn something upon check-in or upon check-out or while they're in their stay. I think it's a very good point.
Cool. So yeah, I guess I know we've gone way over time, so I appreciate you taking the extra, but I'd like to say thanks to Will for coming on today, guys. It's been really interesting, and we're looking forward to catching up again in the future as well. So yeah, thanks for that. And then any questions as well for the viewers, just feel free to pass over, and we'll get back to you on those as well. I will leave all contact info for Will. So if you want to get in touch with him, that's absolutely fine. And yeah, any questions, fire away. So thank you everyone for listening, and cheers, Will, for your time.
Thank you, Dylan, for having me.
Cool. Cheers. Speak to you soon.
Cheers.